Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to hear more. The Siege of Vienna, 1683. The wind over the Carpathians whispered warnings, but no one in Vienna heard them. Not yet. Summer was blooming in the valleys of Central Europe. Church bells still rang. Markets bustled. The scent of roasted chestnuts and boiled cabbage floated through cobbled streets. But far to the east, a shadow was moving. And it was growing. History doesn't unfold in silence. It marches, it rumbles, it grinds its way across borders, beneath banners, and behind boots. And in the spring of 1683, history was marching west, but in the form of the Ottoman Empire. Kara Mustafa Pasha, Grand Vizier to the Sultan, commander of one of the largest military forces on earth, had set his sights on Europe's beating heart. He wasn't chasing plunder, not just glory. He was chasing a legacy, a second Mecca, a second Constantinople. He wanted Vienna, and he intended to take it. Now, understand this. The Ottomans weren't some ragtag force stitched together by desperation. They were a world power, a colossus. Their armies were disciplined, their commanders seasoned, and their war machine terrifying. By the time they set out from Edirne, their host had swelled to over 150,000 men. Infantry, cavalry, engineers, cooks, quartermasters. Janissaries in white felt caps. Sipahi cavalry in scaled lamella armour, camel caravans, ox-drawn wagons, siege artillery so massive it took teams of 30 oxen to drag them a few miles a day. The march west was slow, but deliberate. It wasn't a sprint. It was a storm front. As the Ottoman juggernaut rolled across the Balkans, village after village emptied ahead of them. Some fled. Some fought and were swallowed. Others were conscripted into the mass of movement, Christian slaves and prisoners now burdened with dragging timber, digging trenches, or dying in the process. Letters reached Vienna by the week, warnings from Hungary, pleas from outposts. And then one day, the letters stopped coming. A merchant named Elias Roth, returning from Sopron, arrived at the city gates, half-starved, with blood on his boots. His caravan had been ambushed, the survivors butchered. He rode hard for 2 days straight to escape. The tents, he gasped to the city guard. They stretch further than the horizon. It's not an army, it's an empire, walking. And still, the city hesitated. Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, military governor of Vienna, had pleaded with the Habsburg court for months. He knew the Ottomans weren't bluffing, but politics in the court of Emperor Leopold I moved like syrup in winter. There were debates, there were petitions, there was optimism, and then there was panic. By early July, word reached Vienna that the Ottomans had crossed the Raba River. Fortress after fortress in western Hungary had fallen, and they were coming. Leopold I fled the city on the 7th of July, taking with him the imperial court, the archives, the treasury, and anyone too important to lose. He left Starhemberg behind with just under 15,000 men. They were a mix of regulars, militias, and volunteers. Not all of them well trained, not all well fed, but all of them now responsible for the survival of an empire. The people of Vienna began to dig. They tore up streets for stone, built barricades, sharpened pikes. Even children carried rubble in their aprons. The churches prepared sanctuaries. The monasteries were turned into field hospitals. A silence settled over the city. Not fear, grit. There was no retreat. There was only waiting. And then, on the morning of the 14th of July, they saw it. A dust cloud, stretching across the plain, and then banners, Ottoman green, red silk, black crescents. Then tents, thousands of them, rising like a second city on the fields of the Wienerwald. And finally, the sound. A low, constant hum, like a hive of hornets. Voices, drums, the creak of timber, the thunder of horses, the metal scream of siege guns being unlimbered and dragged into position. The siege had begun. Kara Mustafa didn't strike immediately. He was patient, confident. He didn't want to destroy Vienna. He wanted to possess it. He wanted it to kneel. So he built his ring, a circle of steel and silk around the city, cutting off all roads, all water, all hope. And then the cannons began to speak. The first salvos shook buildings off their foundations. Children screamed, glass shattered, old plaster ceilings collapsed in clouds of dust. Ottoman siege guns weren't elegant. They were brutal, barreled monsters that spat 20-kilogram stone balls at city walls, houses, and anyone unfortunate enough to be in the way. The recoil cracked wagon frames. The earth shook. Vienna had no comparable response, and so the defenders began to adapt. Starhemberg ordered countermines dug, tunnels beneath the ground, to find and destroy Ottoman sappers. It was work done in pitch black, pickaxes, blades, the occasional torch. Men died not in battle, but suffocated, crushed, or buried in silence when the ceiling collapsed on their heads. The city's outer bastions were tested first. The Lowell Bastion, the Berg. Great chunks of masonry began to slough off under fire. The defenders shored them up with timber, sandbags, even corpses. The dead had to be useful. Food began to run out by week 2. Fresh bread was gone. Rats became valuable. Even dog meat fetched coin. Water was rationed. Disease crept in behind the lines. A diarist named Martha Grunwald wrote, "There is no music anymore, no laughter, only coughing and the scraping of boots across broken stone." Outside the walls, the Ottoman host remained confident. They celebrated Ramadan beneath silk canopies, lanterns glowing through the night like fireflies. Kara Mustafa believed he was weeks away from eternal glory. But inside the city, a different kind of fire was kindling, a unity, a purpose. Soldiers and civilians fought side by side, musket men and monks, seamstresses with buckets of boiling water, smiths with hammers. Anyone who could hold a weapon did. And then came the breach. At dawn on 27th of July, an Ottoman mine beneath the outer wall detonated. The explosion flung masonry into the sky. Screams followed. Janissaries rushed the crater, curved blades flashing, their white turbans marking them like ghosts in the smoke. Starhemberg was on the wall within minutes. He rallied what was left of the garrison. They formed a half-moon shield wall and fought, pike to scimitar, firelock to sabre. The noise was deafening, and still Vienna held. Barely. By early August, the city was on its knees. People were starving. The hospitals, if you could call them that, overflowed. The smell of gangrene and blood lingered in the alleyways. Every day, Kara Mustafa sent envoys. Surrender. Open the gates. Spare yourselves. And every day, Starhemberg refused. He had written just one letter, weeks earlier, to the emperor. 4 words. Send help. Soon, please. The letter reached Krakow by courier in the dead of night, soaked in rain, torn, the wax seal half melted from heat. It was laid before the king, Jan III Sobieski of Poland, just before dawn. He read it once, then again he said nothing, just stared at the words. Send help, soon, please. The king closed his eyes and gave the order. Mobilization. Within hours, bells rang across the Polish countryside. Riders galloped to every corner of the realm. Nobles prepared their banners. Blacksmiths hammered steel into sabres and stirrups. Grain was requisitioned, horses readied. The king was going to war, and he was going west. Sobieski had fought the Ottomans before. At Chosim, years earlier, he knew their strength, their tactics, their pride, and he knew this was no minor campaign. Vienna wasn't just another city, it was the city, the hinge on which Europe swung. If it fell, the gates would open, not just to Austria, but to Bavaria, to Saxony, to the Rhine, to Rome. So he marched, 3 weeks, 300 miles, through sodden fields and dense woods, over rivers swollen with summer rain, an army of Poles, Austrians, Saxons, Bavarians, nearly 70,000 in all, cutting through the heart of Europe like a spear. And at its point, the cavalry, the Polish Winged Hussars. They weren't ordinary soldiers, they were avatars. A cavalry so feared, so fast, so thunderous they blurred the line between legend and fact. Armour that shimmered like ice, plumed wings that arched high from the shoulders, designed to whistle in the wind, to terrify enemy horses, to echo across the battlefield like a ghost charge. Their sabres were curved and sharp enough to slice through bone in a single stroke. Their lances, long and unbreakable, could impale 2 men at once. They were warriors, bred for momentum, and now they were coming to Vienna. Back at the city, the situation had worsened. By late August, Kara Mustafa had dug in. Literally, he turned the plains into a battlefield of trenches, lines of communication, forward saps, redoubts and artillery nests. His men worked day and night, tightening the noose. And still the cannons roared. Day after day, stone after stone, Vienna's walls groaned under the weight of it. Entire bastions sagged. Buildings collapsed inward like broken bones. The Lowell bastion was now barely a mound of rubble. The outer defences were gone. The inner city barely defended. Morale, a thread. But Starhemberg still stood. He hadn't slept a full night in weeks. His coat was stained with gunpowder, his voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. But he walked the walls, every day. He showed himself to the men, to the women, to the children still hauling water to the guns. In the face of annihilation, leadership mattered. So when another mine exploded beneath the Berg bastion on September 2nd, tearing a hole wide enough to drive a wagon through, it wasn't surprise that held the line. It was stubbornness and the smell of blood. The Janissaries charged the breach with terrifying force, their scimitars gleaming, their muskets spitting fire. They screamed their war cries, ancient, guttural, ritualistic. They expected collapse. Instead, they met fire. A barrage of grape shot from a hidden culverin mowed down the front ranks. Behind it, a wall of spears. And behind that, the Viennese militia. Not soldiers, people. A butcher with a cleaver. A teenage girl with a broken sword. An old man holding a dented halberd like a cross. They didn't win. But they didn't break. That night, the fires burned higher than ever before. The sky was orange, the air thick with smoke and ash. The stench of death and gunpowder made it hard to breathe. But on the hills, the earth was moving. Sobieski's army had arrived, unseen, unannounced, but not unnoticed. From the Kahlenberg heights, scouts peered down at the Ottoman lines. Sobieski rode forward, flanked by generals. He looked down upon the vast camp, tents, trenches, towers, cannons, a whole city of war. Then he looked beyond to the battered walls of Vienna, and he said simply, "We go tomorrow?" That night, the campfires of the Holy League burned bright. Drums were silent. The men were not. Some sharpened blades, others whispered prayers. Hussars polished their armour until it gleamed like a mirror. A young Saxon officer wrote in his diary, "I do not fear death, I fear arriving too late." Below, in the Ottoman camp, Kara Mustafa was restless. He'd heard rumours, seen movement in the hills, but dismissed it. He believed Vienna was hours from collapse. One more push, one final breach, so he prepared for glory, and in doing so, sealed his fate. At dawn on September 12th, 1683, the mountain exploded with sound. Trumpets, drums, the roar of 70,000 men stepping forward like thunder in the soil. Sobieski led the charge from the centre. The infantry advanced in waves, Austrians, Bavarians, Saxons, their pikes forward, muskets loaded, eyes fixed. The Ottomans scrambled to respond. Troops shifted, cannons re-angled, confusion spread. The lines weren't ready, the command structure frayed. By midday, the Ottoman left was crumbling. But this wasn't the climax. Not yet. This was the storm front. The hammer was still waiting. The Winged Hussars sat poised behind the lines, their horses champing, hooves stomping the ground, feathered wings rippling in the breeze. And Sobieski, grim, focused, silent, waited for the signal. At 4 in the afternoon he raised his sabre, and the world changed. The sabre came down, a gleam of steel in the golden afternoon light, and with that one motion, 3,000 horsemen began to ride. The Polish Winged Hussars thundered from the Kahlenberg heights like an avalanche given form, a wedge of iron and bone. Behind them, dust. Under them, thunder. Ahead of them, the disbelieving eyes of an empire. They did not charge like men. They descended like fury, their lances held high, their sabres drawn, their wings, crafted from eagle feathers, affixed to wooden frames, caught the wind and howled. It wasn't myth. It wasn't theatre. It was tactical terror. Horses reared, Ottoman lines wavered, and then impact. The first wave smashed into the forward trenches. A wall of flesh and steel crumpled. Men were thrown backward like straw. Lances shattered. Sabres sang. The sound of screaming drowned the roar of drums. Behind the front, Kara Mustafa stared in stunned silence. He had never seen anything like it. The Janissaries formed ranks. Archers loosed. Muskets fired. But nothing stopped the charge. Wave after wave poured down. The Hussars, followed by Austrian cuirassiers, Bavarian dragoons, Saxon horsemen, all surging forward, relentless, roaring the names of saints and cities, brothers and fathers, all lost to Ottoman steel over decades of war. The lines broke, not metaphorically, literally. The Ottoman right collapsed first. Then the centre. Their artillery crews abandoned their guns. Wagons overturned. Camels stampeded through their own ranks. Panic rolled like wildfire. In the chaos, Kara Mustafa tried to rally his command. He shouted orders, raised his arms, ordered his elite guard to hold. But it was too late. From the bastions of Vienna, the defenders, Starhemberg's tattered, ash-covered men, poured out like ghosts. They charged into the flanks of the confused Ottoman rear. Some of them limped. Some had no boots. Some fought with tools instead of swords. But all of them had waited 2 months for this moment. The two fronts met in a final crescendo of violence. Muskets flared, sabres clanged, bayonets plunged into flesh. There were no lines, no formations, just the final primal storm of a shattered siege. And when the dust finally began to settle, when the screams faded into moans, when the banners stopped waving and the trumpets ceased to sound, Vienna stood. The Ottoman camp, once a majestic sea of silk and order, was a ruin. Tents torn, wagons burned, bodies strewn across the trampled grass. By nightfall, Kara Mustafa was in full retreat. His dream of glory, of taking the jewel of Europe, crumbled into the dirt behind him. He did not look back. The cost was staggering. Some 20,000 Ottoman dead, thousands more wounded, captured or missing, their great siege cannons abandoned, their treasury wagons looted, and among the wreckage, silence. For the first time in months, Vienna was quiet. Not because the guns had gone silent, but because the people were too stunned to speak. In the early hours of September the 13th, Jan III Sobieski rode through the battered gates of Vienna. His armour was stained with sweat and ash. His face was expressionless. He dismounted in the square and met Count Starhemberg, a man who looked more spectre than soldier. Neither spoke at first. Then the King of Poland removed his gauntlet and extended his hand. "You held," he said quietly. Starhemberg, through cracked lips, replied, "You came." It was not a victory for one man or one army. It was survival, bought with blood and bone, faith and fury. The Holy Roman Empire had been pulled from the edge. The Ottoman tide was turning. The city's recovery would take years. Hospitals overflowed. The wounded filled monasteries and cellars. The dead, Ottoman and Christian alike, were buried in mass graves just outside the city. Food remained scarce. Disease lingered, but the people walked the streets again. Bells rang once more. Lucas, the teenage musketeer who had written to his mother, survived. Barely. His musket, its barrel bent from use, was hung above the hearth by winter. He never fought another battle. Anna Reiter, who had led militia bands in the chaos, remained a legend long after she faded into obscurity. No statue was raised, but every child in the district knew her name. Kara Mustafa, upon returning to Belgrade, was received without ceremony. A month later, the Sultan's envoys arrived. The Grand Vizier was summoned to a quiet garden. There he was offered coffee and a silken cord. His execution was silent. No trumpet, no crowd, just the final reckoning of ambition unmet. The Siege of Vienna changed everything. Not just for the Habsburgs, not just for the Ottomans, but for the entire arc of European history. It marked the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's slow withdrawal from Central Europe. Over the following decades, city after city was reclaimed, borders redrawn. It was not a swift reversal, but it was unmistakable. For the Holy League, the awkward, uneasy coalition of Catholic powers, the victory at Vienna proved that unity, even when fragile, could achieve the impossible. It became a rallying point, a myth, a memory. The event echoed through paintings, sermons, textbooks. It was told at firesides, etched into monuments, and later rewritten in nationalist mythologies. But beneath all of that, at its core, it was about people. People who stood on crumbling walls, who bled in narrow trenches, who lifted muskets too heavy for their shoulders, who passed water buckets hand to hand as fire rained from the sky. The Siege of Vienna was not just a battle of empires. It was a test of faith, of endurance, of defiance. A hinge in the great door of history, slammed shut in the face of an empire. And now, centuries later, we can walk those streets. We can drink strong aromatic coffee in quiet squares, perhaps unaware that once, in that very place, the earth shook with war. We live in a world shaped by the ones who stood and did not break, the ones who looked into the storm and said, "Not here." Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the fire burning.